When we speak of the unconscious, we are not speaking of darkness, nor of something mysterious or supernatural. We are speaking of a part of ourselves that is profoundly human, a part that continues to live, to think, and to feel, even when we are not aware of it. The unconscious, as Freud discovered, is not a place but a process. It is the hidden logic behind our emotions, our dreams, our mistakes, and even our desires. The idea of the unconscious was not born from philosophy or speculation, but from listening. Freud listened to his patients, people whose bodies spoke through pain, whose words stumbled, whose gestures betrayed what they did not dare to say. And in that listening, he discovered that beneath consciousness there was another mind, one that did not follow the rules of logic or time, but the language of desire. The unconscious, he said, knows no no. It does not understand negation. It does not distinguish between past and present, between imagination and reality. Everything that enters it, every memory, every fantasy, every emotion, remains alive, waiting for a chance to return. This means that the unconscious is timeless. What was repressed in childhood does not die. It waits, and it returns, not as memory, but as repetition, as symptom, as dream. It is the persistence of what we tried to forget. Freud's discovery was radical because it shattered the illusion of self-control. Until then, the human being was seen as rational, guided by will and reason, but Freud showed that beneath the rational self there is another force, powerful, creative, and sometimes terrifying, that moves us without our consent. He compared consciousness to the surface of the sea. We see only the waves, the visible movement of thoughts. But beneath it, in the deep, there are currents, invisible yet strong, directing the entire ocean. That deep is the unconscious. To know the unconscious is not to dive into darkness, but to see what moves us. It is to recognize that our thoughts are not always our own, that sometimes we are spoken by something that lives within us. Dreams were Freud's first doorway into this hidden world. He called them the royal road to the unconscious. When we sleep, the censorship of the conscious mind weakens. Desires that cannot be expressed in daylight find a way to appear, disguised in images and metaphors. The dream is the work of the unconscious, trying to satisfy a wish, but in a masked, symbolic form. For example, a person who dreams of climbing a mountain may not be seeking altitude but power, or perhaps reunion with something lost. The dream speaks through symbols, through condensation and displacement, two of the fundamental mechanisms Freud identified. Condensation means that many meanings are fused into one image. Displacement means that the true emotion shifts from one element to another, like a disguise. The unconscious speaks in riddles, and the dream is its poetry. But to understand the dream, one must not look for universal symbols. There is no dictionary of the unconscious. The same image can mean joy for one person and fear for another. Each dream must be read like a personal poem, written in the private language of desire. The unconscious also reveals itself in slips of the tongue, in the words we didn't mean to say. Freud called them parapraxes, or Freudian slips. You intend to say one thing and another escapes your mouth. And immediately you laugh or feel ashamed. But that momentary error is not meaningless. It is the unconscious taking advantage of a small crack in the wall of control. It says what we did not plan to say, but what we secretly wanted to. A forgotten name, a misplaced object, a sudden irritation, all of these are clues. The unconscious is a patient detective, leaving signs everywhere. But why does the unconscious hide? Why does it not speak directly? Because what it carries is often unbearable. It holds the desires society forbids, the emotions morality condemns, the memories we cannot face. When a child desires the parent, when anger rises against someone we love, when envy appears in the midst of affection, consciousness pushes these impulses away. It says, This is not me. And in that moment, repression begins. Repression is the founding act of civilization. Without it, we would live by instinct alone. But repression has a cost. What we deny does not disappear. It becomes symptom. The unconscious, then, is the return of the repressed. It is the persistence of what consciousness has expelled. It finds new paths through dreams, slips, art, illness, or passion. It is the insistence of life itself. Freud often said that the unconscious is structured like a language. Later, Lacan would take this metaphor further, saying, "The unconscious is the discourse of the other." What they meant is that the unconscious does not speak in sensations, but in words, symbols, metaphors. When you forget something, it is not the memory that fails, it is the word that refuses to come. When you feel anxiety but cannot say why, it is because the unconscious is speaking in silence. To interpret the unconscious, then, is to listen as one listens to poetry, not literally, but symbolically. What matters is not what is said, but what is repeated, what returns, what insists. Let us imagine for a moment that the unconscious is like a theater. On the stage, the actors, our conscious thoughts, play their roles. But behind the curtain, the director, unseen, gives orders, changes lines, decides who enters and who exits. The audience sees the play, but not the forces that organize it. That director is the unconscious. Sometimes the director lets the actors improvise. Sometimes he makes them repeat the same scene endlessly. And the audience, that is our consciousness, believes it understands the story, when in fact it knows only a fragment. Analysis is like turning the lights toward the backstage, not to expose it fully, but to glimpse the structure that makes the play possible. Freud discovered that the unconscious is not chaotic, as many thought, but highly organized. It follows its own laws, the primary process, as he called it, a logic of condensation, displacement, and substitution. It is a world without contradiction, where desire reigns. In the unconscious, nothing is forbidden. Everything is possible. A child can be both loved and hated at once. A person can be dead and alive at the same time. Time and logic dissolve. That is why the unconscious can surprise us. It preserves what consciousness has long forgotten. It does not age. It keeps the child alive inside the adult, the wound open beneath the scar. When we react too strongly to something trivial, a look, a tone of voice, a word, it is often because the unconscious has been touched. It recognizes something from the past, something unresolved, something it never stopped feeling. To live without awareness of the unconscious is to be governed by it. Freud once wrote, "Where it was, there ego shall be." This is the task of psychoanalysis, not to destroy the unconscious, but to bring its truth into light. The id, that primitive reservoir of desire, must be recognized, not suppressed. When we make it conscious, we gain freedom. Not freedom from desire, but freedom with desire. To live with the unconscious is to accept that we are divided, that we are both the dreamer and the censor, the lover and the judge. This division is not a flaw, it is our human condition. The unconscious also speaks through the body. When words fail, the body remembers. A migraine, a spasm, a sudden fatigue. They can all be metaphors, the body's way of saying what cannot be said aloud. In Freud's time, hysteria was the most visible form of this. Patients lost their voices, felt paralysis, or fainted without organic cause. But behind each symptom, Freud found a story, a forgotten trauma, a forbidden desire. Once the story was spoken, the symptom often disappeared. Today, hysteria has new forms: anxiety, panic, depression, chronic pain. The body continues to speak. Psychoanalysis reminds us to listen. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of the unconscious is that it is not entirely individual. It is also social. The way we love, the way we feel guilt, the way we fear, all of these are shaped by the culture we live in. The unconscious, though private, is formed by the words of others, parents, teachers, lovers, society itself. This means that when we explore our unconscious, we are also exploring our culture, its prohibitions, its ideals, its hidden violence. To free oneself from neurosis is also to question the language that shaped it. In this sense, psychoanalysis is both personal and political. It does not preach rebellion, but it reveals how much of what we call I was never truly ours. Now one might ask, if the unconscious is invisible, how do we reach it? Freud's answer was simple but profound: by speaking freely. The act of speaking, of associating words without control, allows the unconscious to emerge. When you speak without censorship, without trying to be logical, the unconscious begins to slip through. It shows itself in the rhythm of speech, in the pauses, in the words you choose and those you avoid. The analyst listens not to judge, but to detect the hidden patterns, the repetitions, the contradictions, the echoes of desire. In this dialogue, one speaking, one listening, something extraordinary happens. The unconscious becomes audible. Many people imagine that analysis is about discovering secrets, but the truth is subtler. It is not about finding something unknown, but about recognizing what we have always known, only in another language. The unconscious is not a stranger. It is the part of us that keeps feeling when reason cannot. It is the echo of childhood, the persistence of love, the whisper of what we could have been. To encounter it is not to lose oneself, but to become more complete. Freud once said that the unconscious is the true psychic reality. What we call reality is merely the surface. Beneath it lies a deeper order, one that does not obey time, logic, or morality, but the law of desire. To listen to that law is not easy. It requires courage, the courage to face what we fear in ourselves. But in doing so, we begin to live more authentically. Because the unconscious is not only the source of our suffering, it is also the source of our creativity, our love, our art. Every poem, every dream, every act of tenderness is a gesture of the unconscious. It is the part of us that refuses to die. So, what is the unconscious? It is the invisible author of our life story. It writes between the lines of our actions, hides behind our laughter, speaks in our silence. It is not an enemy to be defeated, but a mystery to be understood. When we stop fighting it, we begin to hear it, and in that listening, we find not chaos, but meaning. To know the unconscious is to discover that within us lives something infinitely larger than the self, a force that remembers, desires, and creates. In this lesson, I invite you to pay attention to the small signs in your daily life. The word you almost said, the dream that lingers in the morning, the emotion that rises unexpectedly. Each of them is a trace, a signature of the unconscious. Don't rush to interpret, just notice. Let them speak. For the unconscious, Freud said, is like a foreign language we once knew and have forgotten. The work of analysis is to relearn that language, slowly, patiently, with curiosity and compassion. And when you do, you will see that every symptom, every fear, every dream carries a fragment of your truth. Listen closely, because in the whisper of the unconscious lies the most honest voice you will ever hear. Let's continue our exploration.